Let's turn our attention to the right of rescission. In a refinance transaction or a loan on an unencumbered piece of property already owned, any consumer that has an ownership interest in a primary residence that is used to secure a loan has the right to rescind or nullify the loan. This rescission period is typically a 3-day right to rescind. However, lenders should be aware noncompliance could result in an extension of this period to a borrower. We will discuss that further in just a bit. But first, a consumer can only have one primary residence or principal dwelling at a time. A vacation home or other second home is not considered a principal dwelling. A transaction secured by a second or vacation home, one that is not currently being used as a principal residence, is not rescindable even if the consumer intends to reside there in the future. For this purpose, creditors must supply to each owner 2 copies of the right to rescind notice, along with 1 copy of the disclosure statement. If the required notice or material disclosures are not delivered, or if there are material errors in the disclosures, the right to rescind extends from 3 days to 3 years after consummation upon transfer of all the consumer's interest in the property or upon sale of the property, whichever occurs first. Additionally, if there are specific errors within the disclosure, then the right to rescind is extended to 3 years. There are some stipulations for the right to rescind notice. First, it must be on a separate document. It must also identify the rescission period on the transaction. It must clearly and conspicuously disclose the retention or acquisition of a security interest in the consumer's principal dwelling. It must outline the consumer's right to rescind. And it must also instruct the consumer to exercise the right to rescind by using the form for that purpose. Finally, this form should have the creditor's place of business address. To rescind the loan, the consumer must notify the creditor before midnight of the 3rd business day after one of the following, whichever comes last: the consummation of the loan, the delivery of the right to rescind notice, or the delivery of all disclosures. The consumer's notice to rescind is considered given when it is delivered to the creditor's place of business. Additionally, it only takes 1 consumer to rescind the loan for all consumers with an ownership interest. If 1 consumer rescinds the loan, the transaction is voided for all consumers with an ownership interest, and none are liable for any amount, including finance charges, in connection with the loan. The creditor must then return any money or property or take any action that shows the termination of the transaction within 20 calendar days after the consumer rescinds. If the creditor has given the consumer any money or property, then the consumer may hold onto it until the creditor has complied with the above requirement. If the consumer elects to waive or modify the right to rescind a loan because of a bona fide financial emergency, the consumer must also provide the creditor with a dated written statement that describes the emergency, specifically waives or modifies the right to rescind, and contains all of the concerned consumer's signatures. Creditors are prohibited from printing forms for this purpose, though. It must be a document that is written and signed by all of the consumers involved in the transaction. All right. Now that we have familiarized ourselves with the rescission requirements, let's present a check for understanding scenario.